I'm Jerry Marzinsky, and next to me is Caprice Thorson. And I've worked in the front lines of mental health for 50 years at this point. 45 years with somebody else. I've worked in the largest state hospital on the planet. I've worked at private hospitals, private psychiatric hospitals, mental health centers. I spent 17 years working in the psychology department of the state prison. And Caprice and I are going to give you a report card on the mental health system, the Western mental health system. From firsthand experience, this mental health system is broken. It doesn't work. It's a drug-fueled catastrophe. It isn't getting at the cause of mental health or mental problems. It's not curing hardly anybody. They're treating symptoms. Um, the suicide rate in the United States has soared up to close to 50,000 people a year now, year after year after year. And a good many of those people are on antidepressant drugs and antipsychotic drugs and other kinds of drugs. From what I've seen, nobody's being cured. They're treating symptoms, you know, and you take the drug, the symptoms go away. You go off the drug, the symptoms reappear. So they're not getting at the cause of anything. We're going to kind of give you a report card on the overall mental health system as we see it. And I would give them an F minus for the amount of money. It's a drug-fueled, pharmacologically driven system.
First thing that I want to do is a disclaimer that this is not medical advice, that neither Jerry nor I are qualified to give medical advice. But what we have done, Jerry challenged me several months ago to really dig into the research of what he knows to be true. So we're going to present we're just offering some slides with the sources, and we'll let you download this PDF if you want it. But once again, if you are on prescription drugs, you have to be very careful in how you would, choose to proceed. So I wanted that little disclaimer. And so first, like what Jerry and I know is that healthy people are not profitable customers. And pharmaceutical companies make money from treating the symptoms, not curing people, just as Jerry said. And this last point, Jerry, I'd like you to just address it because it's what you tell me all the time.
Oh yeah, there are more psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychiatric drugs on the planet than ever in the history of mankind. And as a nation and as a planet, we're getting progressively sicker. The mental health centers are overflowing with mentally ill people. Nobody's getting better. The streets are crowded with mentally ill people. They can't work. The prisons are full of mentally ill people who can't work and committed crimes. The psychiatric hospitals are overflowing. You know, this system is not working.
Right.
They
So how did we get here? And this is what you were talking about.
oh yeah. Okay, so you put it in good.
Mm.
Yeah, in 1910, the Carnegie Foundation and sponsored the infamous Flexner Report, which shut down any medical school teaching subjects outside of mainstream pharmacology. So that would be naturopathy, it would be acupuncture, anything like that, any kind of yoga, whatever. Um, the edict was so powerful that only a few medical schools survived, such as Johns Hopkins and McGill, and a handful of others connected with these groups. They were the only schools who could legally license doctors. And any doctor who practiced anything beside pharmacology were threatened with the loss of their license. They couldn't refer to non-pharmacological treatments. So at this point, 1910, Big Pharma and the deep state had taken over the medical uh, system. They paid off Congress to pass these laws that only pharmacological medicine could be studied in the universities. And if that they were teaching anything else, it wasn't, they weren't licensed doctors. So at that point, they'd taken over the medical industry.
And so I added this slide because I think it's also important for people to know that this Rockefeller medical system is pumping out doctors that are coming out with so much student loan debt that they can't afford to lose their license. They got to play by the rules. So between 194,000 up to $300,000 of debt that they've got to pay off. So, and that comes from Forbes. So, all right, here's your report card, Jerry.
Okay, nobody's getting better, and a great number of those people are on antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs. Right? The suicide rate is not going down; it's increasing every year. You know, they're not curing anything. They're not dealing with the problem. They're putting a Band-Aid over it, and the sore is festering underneath. They're turning these people into zombies. They just gorked out. They're not feeling anything. You know,
Mhm.
and the suicide rate is increasing year after year. Right? It's the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34, and the 11th leading cause of death in the United States. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, the suicide rate, now this is interesting, the suicide rate for psychiatrists is right up there with that for schizophrenics,
Mhm.
or about 5.9 times that of the general population. So here are the people that are running this mental health system. They are the captains of this mental health system. They're the highly trained people that are supposed to be curing people, and they're suiciding at the same rate as schizophrenics, which is their most severe mental illness in the DSM. You know,
Right.
what does that tell you?
Right. And we're getting these statistics from the Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the CDC, and usafacts.org. So, all right, this is a great quote from Thomas Insel, who was the former director of the National Institute for Mental Health. And basically, what he's saying is he was the director for 13 years. They spent $20 billion looking for genetic reasons and neuroscientific biology reasons. And he says, I don't think we moved the needle in reducing suicide, reducing hospitalizations, improving recovery for tens of millions of people who have mental illness. So that's an admission of failure right there.
Yeah. And they don't have a cause for mental illness. They don't know what it is.
Right.
So they keep making it up. They started with mothers. They blame the mothers.
Yeah.
You raised your kids wrong. I know we get into that a little later. Then they went to genetics. You go, oh, it's got to be some kind of genetic stuff. And they got away with that for 10 years. So notice they pushed it from some place that could be observable by the population, the mothers. They go, hey, what did we do? You know,
Right.
and that's
So,
observable. So they pushed it up to where it couldn't be observable. Genetics. You got to be a geneticist to
right.
study that. The regular doctors, the regular psychiatrists, yeah, the regular person didn't have access to genetic type stuff. And it took a while, maybe 10, 15 years for the geneticists to get around to studying schizophrenia. Right? And in the meantime, they're going, well, yeah, it's genetics. We believe it's genetics. And then when they couldn't find a specific genetic cause, they came up and they go, well, it's not just one genetic cause, it's a bunch of them all put together, and we'll figure it out eventually. But they didn't find anything. So they went to the biological imbalance cause. Okay, so
Right. And we're going to get to that soon. But first,
yeah.
let's talk about your favorite work of fiction, the DSM.
Oh, the DSM. Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
the DSM, it's their Bible. It's the Bible for psychology and psychiatry. They got every psychiatric diagnosis known to man in there. Mm.
Right.
So started out with 109 disorders, and then it just ballooned from there. Every 3 years, I think they meet and they make up these disorders. They're totally made up. From what I heard, it sounds like a tobacco auction. Somebody comes in and goes, "Hey, I got a new mental illness here, and this is what it is." And then 2/3 of the people or the psychiatrists who belong to that group are under the influence of pharmacology, the big pharma. So they're looking for something to make another medicine to treat. So they come up with these disorders, and then they come up with a medicine to treat them. You know,
Right.
and some
Right.
of them are absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Coffee drinking disorder, I mean, is one of them. you know?
Right, exactly. So the point that we're making is like the former DSM-4 task force chairman said this. There are no objective tests in psychiatry, no x-ray, laboratory, or exam finding that definitively will say that someone does or does not have a mental disorder. Right? There are no tests. It's
Yeah,
all observing behaviors.
yep, it's
And
all
it's
subjective.
all subjective. So here's what Thomas says. Psychiatrists call manic depression and schizophrenia mood disorders and thought disorders. And then he makes the point, unlike bile or urine, you cannot observe thoughts or moods, right? And so that's why they call them disorders. That's why it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, because they can't really call them diseases, but they pretend they are diseases,
They
right?
tried. They tried. They got knocked back down by the medical association because these things are not diseases. They want you to think it is. So yeah, like Caprice says, they now call them disorders. They
Right,
got child relational disorders. So that's kids fighting.
right.
They got all these crazy disorders, and
Yep.
and they have all these stupid meds to, for the disorders. So yeah,
Yeah, here are some of your crazier ones in the DSM that you told me about. Caffeine.
yeah, caffeine. You drink too much coffee, you got a caffeine disorder. You
Right.
know, anxiety and sleep disorders, and and you look at this DSM, and it looks like a real scientific work. I mean, they have categories and subcategories and subcategories and numbers all over the place and these different syndromes and disorders. It looks like, some mad scientist put it together. It looks like a real work of science. It's a made up work of fiction. There's no test for even one of those psychiatric disorders. There's no lab tests, there's no EKG, there's no EEG, there's no objective test for any of these disorders. And some of them are totally ridiculous. As mathematics disorder, I've had that since I was a kid, you know.
Right.
They got this Alice in Wonderland disorder, confusion about how big or small the body parts are. Florence syndrome disorder, people that are exposed to objects of great beauty. I think that happened to Japanese tourists, and they recommended antidepressants to treat it.
Oh,
You know, they,
yeah.
uh,
Well, this is one of the more disturbing ones that's in the new DSM, paraphilic coercive disorder, because it covers rape and pedophilia and sex with a non-human object. So the British Psychological Society said, rape is a crime, it's not a disorder. And we would have grave concerns that such views may offer spurious and unscientific defense to a rapist in a criminal trial, which is very valid.
yeah, and I wonder what drugs they recommend for rape and pedophilia and sex with a
Right.
non-human object. They're probably good. You're not going to walk into a psychiatrist's office, tell them anything, and not walk out without some kind of prescription of some toxic drug.
Right. So when they were putting together the DSM-5, the British Psychological Society had a response, and you can look at the response at the PDF below. But basically, they are saying that these diagnoses are clearly based largely on social norms, with symptoms that all rely on subjective judgments with little confirmatory physical signs or evidence of biological causation. They're saying there's no biological causation. And these diagnoses are plagued by problems of reliability, validity, prognostic value, and comorbidity. So at the end, they say the whole DSM, the diagnostic system on its base, therefore falls short of the criteria for legitimate medical diagnoses.
Yeah, and they treat it like a Bible. You go through graduate school, you go get into the PhD. They treat it like a friggin' Bible.
Right,
Everything revolves around this made up volume that has no testable verification. And what's even weirder, you get 10 psychiatrists together and you give them a semi-complex diagnosis, put them in a room separate and let them formulate the diagnosis. Then it's not going to be the same
right.
because it's totally subjective. I've watched how these guys do it. I mean, I've worked in these mental institutions most of my life. They go in there, they ask the patient, hey, what's going on? Oh, well, I'm feeling depressed and, da, 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 and this and that and this. And 15, 20 minutes, no more than an hour later, for the private psychiatrists, if they're institutional or government psychiatrists, it's probably 20 minutes. They come up with a diagnosis and they start with a pill. There's no test. There's
Right.
so they say it's a biological imbalance. You will never see them give a test, a blood test, or any kind of other test to determine what drugs in the brain are out of balance by how much, because they don't exist. There is no biological imbalance in the brain. They proved
Right.
that over and over again, but they're still pushing it. I saw it a couple of months ago in one of the advertisements. It's believed that this is caused by,
Right.
you
And
know,
they manipulate language in a way.
oh
But
yeah,
so it
yeah.
was interesting. Like, I didn't realize the first antidepressants came out in the 1950s. And then here we are in the 1960s. It used to be a drug-centered model. And in the 1960s, they now moved to a disease-centered model. So this is the work of Joanna Moncrief. And I think that this is a kind of an important distinction for people, because it used to be a drug-centered model. And in the drug-centered model, there was an understanding that the psychotropic drugs, are crossing the blood-brain barrier, and they're creating an abnormal brain state by altering the natural brain chemistry, right? Like Peter Breggin even goes so far as to basically say all psychotropic drugs damage the brain. So the therapeutic effects you're getting is from a drug-induced state that's not natural. But when they move to the disease model, now they're saying that drugs help correct an abnormal brain state, which is the inverse, right? You've got your natural brain state that the drugs are disrupting, but what they are now claiming is the drugs are correcting something. So drugs become disease treatments.
Well,
And
the other thing they're taking off on is, medical drugs. Like you take an antibiotic and it cures the infection. So they're trying to play on that, like their drugs cure something, and they
right,
don't, because
they,
these are not physical diseases. These are energetic, psychological diseases. There's no proven physiological cause.
right. And then we're going to get in. So this is what she said basically, the drug-centered model focuses our attention on the impact that drugs have on the body and the brain and the consequences they have. And so it's necessary to do that so you can be cautious in your use of these drugs. But since they're in the disease model, they don't proceed with that caution. But it's just important to know that all drugs are foreign chemicals that change the way the body normally functions.
What they found with in the state hospitals, so the long-term psychiatric hospitals, is they found that the brains of schizophrenics that they were giving these antipsychotic drugs to had shrunken like prunes. I mean, their,
Mm,
their brains had actually shrunken. These drugs were doing severe, permanent neurological damage to these people. And
mhm,
instead of stopping them and trying something else, they would put up cogentin on top of it so it would mask that neurological damage that, it was like tongue darting and nervousness, jitteriness like that. They'd mask it with another drug and then let it proceed. At least that's what they were doing at the hospitals that I worked at. You know, yeah, shock treatment was another one. I mean, they're still doing these shock treatments. So back in the 70s, they were given 3,000 of those every year at Central State Hospital where I worked. And each
mm,
one of them was causing neurological damage. A neurologist could see the neurological damage after even one of them.
mm,
So, and before that, they were doing lobotomies where they this is before they had drugs or anything. They were using straitjackets. They would get an ice pick, stick it in the person's eye, and scramble their prefrontal cortex. They just
mm,
scramble it, and they would turn them into zombies. And they had a lobotomy mobile that drove around the United States and did this thing to patients. They'd bring their relatives out there. Oh, we can't control this guy. Please do this thing, and they'd scramble their brain. Now, I remember meeting one of those at the state hospital I used to work at, because it was huge. They had everything there. And talking to that guy, I mean, the feeling I got is he's just not quite human. You just couldn't put your finger on it, but he was very different from a normal human being. And he had that done decades ago. It's
wow.
permanent neurological damage. They just scramble your brain.
And what Jerry and I keep saying is that psychological distress is not a brain disease. So,
Yeah, they try to turn normal emotion into some kind of disorder.
right. So, we probably should have put this in the beginning, but basically it goes back to Hippocrates and the idea that you have an imbalance in your humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. And then I'm going to say that wrong, Paracelsus came up with the concept of fighting disease and the belief that all things are poison, nothing is without poison, but it's only the dose that doesn't make a thing a poison. So what they're saying with these psychotropic drugs is if you give the right dose, it's okay that it's a chemical poison. And we're saying, no, no, no.
No, no, no,
And
no.
it's also like not everything is a poison. What do you mean nothing is without poison? An apple, if you organic apple's not a poison. So the whole basis of modern medicine is flawed. And
Yeah,
so
and you look at what they do. I mean, some of these patients have had, like they got like 16 pills. What I saw at the psych hospital was, especially the state hospital, they bring these people in once a month for 15 or 20 minutes. How you doing? If they mentioned anything about hearing voices or they weren't feeling good, they would up their drugs. I
mm,
mean, it's up them or add other drugs to them. You never saw them hardly ever take them down. They would just up. And some of these guys were taking so much drugs they just looked like friggin' zombies. And
right.
I remember one of the first weeks I was at that state hospital. I was walking down the first floor, and they had a banister that went up to the second floor. The
Mm,
cap on that banister at the second floor was off, and here was a maintenance man cutting through the banister on the first floor, and that had a cap on it. So there was a bunch of patients watching the sparks and the smoke and all that kind of stuff. So I just joined them. They were standing there watching the fireworks. When that cap fell off of that banister, it was a gush. It was like a waterfall of psychiatric pills. Thousands of them came pouring out of that banister. They've been sticking them in there for decades. It was just like a waterfall of psychiatric drugs. And I'm like, why are they doing that? Why are they doing that?
right. So we're going to end up with a solution to all of this. And I think it
Eventually.
goes to what Peter Kinderman says, that we need to embrace a model of mental health and well-being that recognizes our essential shared humanity. But before we get to the solution, we're going to provide a little more information about why this is a flawed, broken system. So here we go into the chemical imbalance. No research has ever proven a chemical imbalance as the cause of mental illness, right, Jerry?
Right, it was made up by Eli Lilly in the 70s when they came out with Prozac for the purpose of selling Prozac. They didn't know, they knew it was a lie at the time. They knew it wasn't true, and they put it out anyway. So it was picked up by, the psychiatric mafia, and now then the medical schools and big pharma, and they were teaching it in all the universities. When I got to the state hospital working there, I asked them, what causes schizophrenia? Oh, it's a chemical imbalance. That's what they were programmed with, and there's no proof of it anywhere whatsoever. You know,
No, none
so
whatsoever. And there are over 200 neurotransmitters. So how can we say one or two are responsible, right?
yeah, and they don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be, let alone what's out of balance. So you would never see them give any kind of lab test or lab work or anything else, and any kind of baseline testing to see what of those 200 neurotransmitters are out of balance or by how much. Never.
Right.
And I remember one time I thought that kind of odd that they didn't have a baseline, and here they were saying it's a chemical imbalance, and they were prescribing drugs for it without any kind of lab test or blood work or X-rays or EK, nothing, no kind of objective test at all. It was all subjective. Okay, I think we'll start here. It's like throwing a dart at a dartboard, you know.
Right. And further, there's also this thing that, oh, it's serotonin, right? And so research has shown there is absolutely no association between serotonin levels and depression.
Yeah, and that's what they were claiming. Oh yeah, it's a serotonin imbalance. So they came up with serotonin reuptake inhibitors, so that neurotransmitter would stay out there and re-trigger the nerves over and over again. But in reality, it wasn't too much more effective than a friggin' placebo, and they get away with it.
Right. So this is where it's important. So, okay, so yes, SSRIs, which are the antidepressants, do act on the serotonin system. Um, but so does LSD, right? So here's where, like, this is like really interesting. The line of reasoning is logically problematic because LSD also acts to increase serotonin levels, and we don't say, oh, people were LSD deficient, right?
Yeah, they'll do anything to sell those drugs. They'll say anything. It doesn't matter. If you'll take them, they'll sell
Right,
them.
right. All right, so here's where it's important. Every person's brain is unique, leading each of us to have unique traits and abilities. Just because your brain works in a particular way does not mean you have a chemical imbalance. A
Yeah, they
certain amount of sadness, anxiety, or other emotional upset is normal, and though we may be able to block these by chemicals, that would dehumanize us, right?
yeah, and it does. And what they do is they pathologize feelings. So somebody whose partner died and they stay depressed for more than a certain amount of time, they've got a depressive disorder. That they'll treat with an antidepressant drug. I mean,
So once again, correlation does not prove causation. And the thing that I think is important is when they're doing these brain scans, chronic stress can reduce the size of the hippocampus, right? And so they're discounting the environmental causes of emotional distress. And I think this is something, 69% of female patients diagnosed as psychotic, and over 70 studies had reported physical or sexual abuse.
yeah, and there's a lot of abuse in the background. Matter of fact, it appears that most psychological problems are caused by abuse or trauma. It's either physiological, physical, mental, or sexual abuse
Mhm.
result in psychological problems.
Right.
And
And
none,
it
and none of these drugs get to any of that.
No, and it leaves that energetic kind of scar, and that's what Jerry and I
Yes.
are so passionate about helping people heal because they have the ability to heal themselves without drugs. So,
And these are energetic scars that these
right.
drugs don't touch.
Because they're Yes. Okay, so this is really interesting from Peter Bregan. If you have a biochemical imbalance in your brain, the odds are overwhelming that your doctor put it in there with psychiatric drugs. In fact, these are the only known biochemical imbalances in psychiatric patients. The biochemical imbalances are caused by drug treatments and electroshock, as you just said, right? So these drugs are developed to cause a chemical imbalance in the brain, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah, and some of them are you can't go off these drugs suddenly or you risk your life. And several of the antidepressants trying to get off them, Wellbutrin's one of them. You try to get off that stuff once you start it, and it's like a heroin withdrawal.
Mm,
And I wouldn't be surprised if the drug companies put that withdrawal in there to prevent these people from going off those drugs.
wow.
I've seen patient after patient that was on Wellbutrin and they could not get off it. They almost had to go to a drug treatment program to get off this stuff. And then you got, Ritalin and Adderall and
Um,
those are amphetamines. You
Yep,
know,
we'll get
I,
into that for sure.
yeah.
That's crazy. All right, so basically, we're going to just put the nail in the coffin of the biopsychochemical framework has no scientific evidence to support it, right? The abnormal brain scans they see are either caused by stress or the psychological drugs they're giving them. There's no genetic cause ever been found, and the biochemical imbalance in the brain has never been found.
And
No,
these are Yeah,
nope.
these are all lies put out by big pharma and the psychiatric mafia to make you believe that they know something about mental illness
Right. So, the thing that's important to understand is how big the prescription drug business is.
and how much
Right?
money they're making.
800, almost 806 billion in 2024,
Yeah,
right?
that's not million, that's billion.
Right. Right. And these pharmaceutical companies are spending 6 billion a year on direct consumer advertising, right? All of those ads that go, side effects may include blah, 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 blah. Ask your doctor, right? And when you see the last part, 560 billion spent on drugs through Medicare B and D, and 58% were on those that were advertised, which just shows these people are watching their televisions being like, oh, go and
Brainwashed.
doctor, right?
Yeah. And that's not legal in any other place except here in New Zealand. And,
Exactly,
and
exactly. So that was just the overall drug market, and this is the psychiatric drug market, right? Is 52 billion.
that's billion. On antidepressant, I believe it's like, the old last ones I remember were 4.7 billion for antipsychotic drugs and about the same for antidepressant drugs. We're talking billions of dollars here. They're not curing anything. They're just treating symptoms. They don't make money curing people.
Right. So look at this statistic. 11% of Americans on SSRI antidepressants in 2023. 25 to 30% of US college students on a psychotropic drug, right? 20% of people in the UK on antidepressants. And the benzodiazepines, which are terrible, 5% of people, right?
Those are addictive.
Right, right. And so from 2012 to 2023, stimulant use increased by 60%.
That's amphetamine, Adderall, Ritalin.
Right. And guess what? 32% of those stimulants are for patients under 20 years old,
Yeah.
right? So big business, big business. So I want to talk a little bit about the types of psychiatric drugs, Jerry, because probably most people don't know the categories. Um, Antipsychotics, those are given mainly to schizophrenics. Is that correct? Or people diagnosed with schizophrenia, I should say.
Well, they give them for virtually everything, but it's primarily used for schizophrenia. And there's Risperdal, Seroquel, Thorazine. In the state hospital with Thorazine, that was a rough one.
Mm.
They take it for long enough. They can't walk right. They called it the Thorazine shuffle, where they kind of shuffle their feet. They no longer walk with a normal gait. That's neurological damage that was taking place, and it was common.
Mm. All right. So the next one are the BZs, right? For anxiety, Xanax.
That's Librium, Librax, all those kind of things for anxiety. Those are addictive. You get on those things, it's hard to get off them.
Mhm.
So here they are prescribing you an addictive drug for something that doesn't cure the anxiety. It just merely treats the symptoms of it. You feel gorked out for a while. And then when you run out of medicine, it's even worse because you got the side effects of the drugs on top of that.
Right. And as we'll dig into this deeper, we'll show that oftentimes it makes the anxiety much worse. So then the big group is antidepressants, the SSRI antidepressants for depression, Prozac, Zoloft, that whole group.
Yeah, again, many of them they're not very effective, and many of them work only slightly better than friggin' what do you call it, a placebo.
Right, right. We'll show those studies. And then polypharmacy for bipolar. I guess they're just throwing a whole bunch of
Yeah,
different.
they throw in all that. Usually they'll use lithium for one of that, or what was the other one? Started with a B. Well, no, I forgot what it was. But yeah, they'll just mix all kinds of stuff in there. But usually it's lithium.
And then it's striking that for ADHD, this hyperactive disorder, they're giving them stimulants. So we'll show the results of that too.
Yeah,
But and the direct consumer advertising, once again, this is what Jerry said. It's only approved in the United States and New Zealand. No other industrial country allows that.
they're
So,
not. It's crazy. Ask your doctor about this. They always show somebody smiling while they're putting all these subcaptions about all the horrible side effects it has. You know,
right. All the
it's
happy imagery. Ah,
happy imagery. Yeah, you're paying effect to the imagery and you're not looking at all the side effects, including death in a lot of cases.
and suicide. Right. Okay. So let's get into the long-term efficacy of these because the thing that really shocked me is they're not doing any long-term studies on these drugs. They're all 6 to 12 weeks. How do they get away with that?
They get paid off. You know, the FDA and they're being paid off by the drug companies. They're all paid off. The drug companies have a lot of money. They control the educational system. They control what gets published, what doesn't get published. You publish something they don't like, your grants are being cut off. You
Right,
know, they control the medical schools. They control what they teach. They control what they think. They're it's kind of like a brainwashing factory. A lot of these psychiatrists come out of they're not even aware of a lot of these nasty side effects that these drugs have. And I've never seen one in all the years I've been working, a psychiatrist go through some of the most dangerous side effects and saying, if you see any of these, let me know immediately. They don't do
right,
that. They'll go, oh, you're going to get blurred vision. You'll get dried mouth. You know, you might get some sexual dysfunction, but it will go away after a couple of weeks. They don't talk about the damage it does to the neurological system long term. They,
right.
I'm not even sure they know it. I don't know. I've never seen one tell a patient.
Well, and they're not even trying to cure anything. They're just masking
No,
symptoms, as we said.
they're,
And then
they're just dishing out drugs.
the protracted withdrawal, sometimes the withdrawal symptoms never go away, right?
Mm.
Crazy. All right. So it was interesting. I sent Jerry an article earlier that the new HHS secretary is now launching a study to say, do psychiatric drugs cause violent behavior? Yes, they do.
Yeah. Look at you and suicidal behavior too. You see on the small print on a lot of these antidepressants, suicidal ideation. And like
Mm,
we said earlier, 50,000 people in the US are killing themselves every year. And a good many of them are on these antidepressant drugs, you know, and the rate keeps going up. So what's happening here? You know, what they're doing is not working. It's not working. It's like doing the same crap over and over again, getting the same effects, and it's getting worse and worse and worse.
right. So here's a chart showing some of the common side effects. And we're going to call them direct effects because they're not really side effects.
They're
You know, they use
toxic, they're
language, right?
toxic effects of a toxic drug.
Right, right, exactly. So we'll get into, so okay, let's get into what is one of the most scary, severe mental disorders, schizophrenia, right? Because I think this was really interesting that it was the families of schizophrenics that kind of were begging for a medicalization of schizophrenia.
Yeah, they couldn't handle these people. So what they do is they drop them off at the psychiatric hospital. You know, and back in the old days, they would chain them to the walls. You know, they couldn't control them. They had chains on the brick walls that held them in the basements.
Mm,
Um, yeah, that's where straitjackets came from. They were invented in France in the 1800s, and you know, when I first went to work, the straitjackets were still around, but the drugs had taken over because they found they could drug down entire psychiatric populations, so they weren't causing any trouble. And
mm,
that's what the purpose was, control. They wanted to control these people so they didn't have to spend a lot of money on staff. They didn't have to spend money on security. They didn't have to, because, you know, in the old days, they had to fight these guys and lock them into a straitjacket. And both the patients and the psych staff were getting hurt. So these drugs, they wouldn't accept them in Europe. It was back when they came out, they were discovered. See, here's big pharma going, oh, we spend billions of dollars on research, so we got to charge all this money for these drugs. Bullcrap. The antipsychotic drugs were discovered by accident in a dye lab in Germany because all the people making that particular dye were getting all gorked out. So some French scientists came and got the dye, extracted the phenothiazines out of it. And then they wanted to test it in Europe in a mental hospital. They wouldn't let them. Okay, so they brought it over to the United States and they drugged down an entire ward and they went, oh, this is wonderful. Yeah, we want this stuff. And then it just spread, you know, because back then psychiatry and neurology were fighting it out for who was going to be dominant in that field. And psychiatry was losing by leaps and bounds. They just jumped on these drugs like vampires, you know,
mm.
and just took them for themselves. Even today, regular general practitioners don't like prescribing psychiatric drugs. They go, oh, that's the province of psychiatrists. So they've cut that out for themselves. you know.
Well, although I have found in direct experience that pediatricians want to give Prozac and Xanax to
Mm.
teenagers, fruit like candy. Honestly, it's crazy. So, all right. So this is really interesting. Okay. Yeah, they're toxic. Yeah, they're giving them chemical lobotomies, but don't they work? No. Right. So isn't this interesting that people that had a psychotic break but never got one of these drugs have a recovery rate of about 80%?
Yeah, so along with the neurological damage they're doing, they're slowing down their recovery. And on top of that, what they're telling a lot of these patients is, oh, you got schizophrenia, that's a life sentence. You got to take these drugs for the rest of your life. It's like a very hopeless, disgusting message. I've seen it over and over and over again where they go, you have to take the rest of your life, you got to take these drugs. There's nothing else you can do for it.
Right. So here are the statistics that show if you never go on an antipsychotic, your chance of recovery is 80%. But if you do go on a long term, you're the 5%. I mean, that is a vast difference.
Now, that doesn't mean there aren't people that need those drugs. I mean, I've seen some violent psychiatric patients that there was no other way to control those suckers than to drug them out of their minds. They were
Mm.
so dangerous. And the same way in the prison, some of those guys are so dangerous, but they shouldn't be given for life. It should be like a temporary crutch, because they're doing neurological damage.
Right.
And the patients hate it. I mean, they hate taking those things.
Mm.
They have lots of toxic effects.
All right, here you go. Akathisia.
That's due to neurological damage.
Mm. And it occurs 14 to 35% of patients that get these antipsychotics get the akathisia. Ah,
That's a good uncontrollable shaking or lip smacking or tongue darting, like with that. It's neurological damage.
right, because then even if they go off these antipsychotic drugs,
Still
they
there.
have it, right?
Yeah, it's still there. Doesn't go anywhere. It's permanent neurological damage. And they blamed it on they go, oh, that's schizophrenia causes that. But the researchers proved no. We give it to rats, monkeys, and uh, you know animals, and they get the same thing. Happens to them. You know, so the big pharma went nuts about that. They couldn't stand it.
Right. So yeah, here it says over 300,000 cases of motor brain damage because of these antipsychotic
Yeah,
drugs.
and
I'm
that's
sure that,
permanent neurological damage. Yeah,
mm,
same thing with shock treatment. You know.
right. All right. So this is interesting because in 2005, they did a public health advisory and they basically said that treatment for behavioral disorders in elderly with dementia, um, it's increased. If you give them these antipsychotic medications, it increases mortality from 1.6 to 1.7 fold.
Yeah, there are people who die because of these drugs. I mean, I've talked to a few of them. Their relatives have died due to the use of these drugs. These are
Right.
dangerous drugs.
So in 2005, they offer this advisory, but guess what? In May of 2023, they approved an antipsychotic drug for agitation in patients with dementia, even though it increases mortality.
Yeah, and look at the cost, 14,000, 1,400 a month. This is another thing that these buzzards are doing. Is right now to stay sane in the United States for 1 month, you're paying like $200 a visit for a psychiatrist to prescribe these drugs for you. And then you're paying close to 800 or $1,000 for these antipsychotic drugs. You go across the border into Mexico, you can see a psychiatrist for a fraction of that price. He'll give you a diagnosis. You can go into the pharmacy and buy them over the counter without a prescription. So if you
Wow.
feel you don't need them anymore, you don't have to take them for about $75 for the same drugs that are made by the same companies here in the US. So they are raping the US citizen on these drugs, going, oh, well, they can afford it. So we're going to charge them, thousands of dollars more for these drugs than we will for Mexico or some of these other countries. Trump just stepped in on that and said, no, you will not charge US citizens any more for these drugs than you're charging the poorest country you're selling them to. And boy, they went nuts over that. They went absolutely nuts. But they've been robbing us blind for decades.
Right. And we conceive by the, this approval that there's profits over people. So now we're going to move on to the class of BZs, because I can never say the benzodiazepine. Is that how you say it, right?
Yeah, benzodiazepines.
Benzodiazepines. Okay, so after withdrawing, people got worse than they were before they started the drug. That's a problem, right?
Yeah, that's a problem.
People who never took Xanax continued improving down to less than 2 panic attacks on average, while people who took Xanax and then discontinued went up to 7 panic attacks on average. Overall anxiety got worse for people who taken Xanax. I don't think
And
that people are being told this information.
no, and Xanax is addictive. It's really hard to get off of once you start it.
Right.
They love that because they're selling Xanax left and right over the counter. I mean, it's not over the counter, it's got to be prescribed, but they go back and, oh, I need my Xanax. I can't sleep without it. I can't function without it. I have to have Xanax, and they dishing it out.
Right. Now look at so the benzos leads to fourfold increase in depressive symptoms. So you're taking it for anxiety and then you get like very
Depressed.
Oh, and this is what you were saying also is that users are consistently more impaired across all cognitive categories. And it leads to malaise, ill health, and neuroticism, job
Yeah.
loss, unemployment, and loss of work through illness. So these are really damaging people's lives.
Yeah, and here people are taking them because the doctor told me to. They know what they're doing. Yeah, they
Mm,
know what they're doing, all right. They're lining their pockets.
right. And then this is, if you look at the product, I just pulled this from the Pfizer product monograph for Xanax. Look at all of these symptoms and how the incidence of them. I mean, the information is right there for the doctors to look at.
On top of it being addictive.
Right. Okay, now we're going to move on to the SSRI antidepressants, right? Here are the most common toxic effects, which is crazy. Lots. Um,
Plus,
so
it turns you into a semi-zombie.
Well, so because all of these effects are so bad, the Food and Drug Administration issued a black box warning on antidepressants. And this is what it said. Antidepressants increase the risk of suicidal thinking and suicide in children and adolescents with major depressive disorder and other psychiatric disorders. They had to issue this black box warning
So it
because
makes them
of
feel
suicide.
worse.
Right. Now, so that's a black box warning. Look at all the drugs that it's a black box warning on. Look at all of this.
Yeah, all these things lead to suicidal ideation. And they prescribing them by the truckload.
Mm. Mm, mm, mm. Well, and then just so it gets worse. The case against Prozac, right? So in clinical trials, the use of tranquilizers were used to convert people that got severe agitation. And so when they submitted the clinical trial data for Prozac, it showed little to no benefit when those tranquilized patients were removed, right? It was no better than a placebo, but the FDA allowed Eli Lilly to keep the tranquilized patients in the trial so that it looked like there was some benefit.
They're being paid off again.
Right, right. So yeah, so then the company paid off the plaintiffs large amounts of money not to introduce evidence. The judge found out about that and changed the judgment to settled instead of,
And the combination was dangerous,
mhm.
not only and marginally effective.
Right. Crazy.
So the money, follow the money.
Follow the money.
These guys are after the selling drugs and money and selling the psychiatrists selling their services to
So
prescribe them.
yeah, and one of the most shocking things I found in doing this research, Jerry, was that all SSRI antidepressants, and that's this, all of those are spermicidals and result in sexual dysfunction.
Yeah, they won't tell you that either.
All of them. So 60% of men and women experience sexual dysfunction after taking an SSRI, and 55% still had problems 6 months later after discontinuing. Like what?
They find that out by surprise
Right. What in the
because
world?
they're not being told.
All right. It also, the SSRI antidepressants harm unborn babies when taken by pregnant women. So, a 2015 study by the CDC found that birth defects occur 2 to 3.5 times more frequently women treated with Paxil and Prozac early in pregnancy. So, there have been hundreds of lawsuits about this, and the maker of Paxil settled 800 birth defect lawsuits for 1.14 billion.
And I've never seen a psychiatrist mention that to any patient that I worked with.
Crazy. All right, now we're moving on to the toxic effects of bipolar drugs. And these are just a few of them.
You know, it's about valproic acid and lithium.
Mm. So, liver toxicity, damage to the pancreas, brain damage, blindness, peripheral circulatory collapse. What does that mean? Your veins just collapse, your artery?
Yeah, I guess. You know,
Stupor, coma.
now, the other thing I've seen with lithium is that if it's given to somebody in a hot climate, okay, and they're not drinking enough water, that lithium level goes up and it can become toxic.
Mm,
You know, so you have to watch it. I mean, they have to test for that stuff. It takes a certain amount of it to get the effect that they're looking for. And if the body dehydrates, if they're sweating or working somewhere, that lithium level can climb up into the toxic level and kill the guy.
mm. Oh my. Well, and here's
Risperidol.
Risperidol.
That's one of their new atypical drugs. And what atypical usually means is it doesn't have as many nasty side effects. So what they're doing is that's how they're improving the drugs. The side effects aren't quite as nasty, you know. So that's their modern improvement. But they're still causing the same kind of damage.
Right, right. And they're giving it to autism patients as well, which is
Yeah.
Jeez. All right, now we're going to get into, as a mom, one thing that just breaks my heart, the children that are being put on these psychiatric drugs. 3.1 million 0 to 17-year-olds given ADHD stimulants. 2.15 million on antidepressants, 1.15 on anti-anxiety, including those highly addictive benzos, right? Um, so just 829,372 prescribed antipsychotics.
You know, and they got a lot of kids on those antipsychotic drugs too. I have the figures here somewhere. But again, the kids, I mean, these things are doing brain damage and they're filling kids full of them. Yeah, here it is here. Now, these were 2017 figures. 2.7 million kids on antipsychotic drugs in 2017. 622, over 622,000 under the age of 5. 80,000 on ADHD drugs, which is amphetamine.
Mm,
35,000 on antipsychotic drugs. Over 85,000 on antipsychotic drugs. So these are the worst ones that are causing the brain damage, the neurological damage. Over 389,000 on antidepressant drugs. And this is on 2017, and it's much higher now. They don't care.
they don't care. They don't care. So we're going to talk about the case against ADHD. ADHD is not a disease. It's an umbrella term for a group of behaviors that annoy adults. There is no documented biological or genetic cause of ADHD. So basically, what they found is children are going to act out in environments that are not suited to childhood, like sitting still at a desk in school and listening to a lecture.
Yeah, that used to drive me nuts. I couldn't stand it.
Right. So once they're diagnosed, and the diagnosis is so easy to get, we're going to show you, they give these powerful stimulants that are related to amphetamines.
I talked to a lot of prisoners when I worked in the psych department there that started off on these drugs. And then that wasn't good enough for them. So when they got off, when they got to the streets, they just went and bought meth off the streets because these things are amphetamines.
So,
Ritalin, Adderall, Atarax.
and so basically, Jerry, do people build up a tolerance to these drugs and then they just need more and more?
Somewhat. Um, but yeah, it makes them feel good. I mean, amphetamines make you feel like Superman. You have a lot of energy, you're very quick, you get a lot done. Um, but the more you take, all of a sudden you start hearing voices. So that we're talking about um, meth now. Okay,
Mhm.
so that they move to meth, they start hearing voices, and it's like they go, "Oh, that's just a hallucination," and when I come down, it'll go away, and it does, and that may go 10, 15, 20, 50 times, and then one day those voices don't go away, and they're just as psychotic as any of the psychotics in a state hospital, and those voices are there for the life of them. They will not go away. It creates psychosis at a level far past any other drug. The prisoners used to call it the devil's drug.
Mhm.
And those voices are nasty. They tell them you're no good, you're ugly, you're stupid, people are plotting against you, they're trying to poison you, they're trying to kill you. I mean, it's always negative stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And it was your work on that that kind of led me to the work that I'm doing now because, yeah, they're not hallucinations of these voices.
No, they're not hallucinations. They run very specific, repeatable, predictable patterns. And the psychiatric mafia is insisting that they are auditory hallucinations. Hallucinations don't run fixed patterns. And it was the same patterns on, when I worked in the state hospital in Georgia as it is with the mental health uh, facilities I worked here in Arizona.
Mm.
Same patterns. It's like they're all made by some cosmic cookie cutter somewhere.
Oh,
You
jeez.
know?
Yeah, the evil one is busy, unfortunately.
Yeah, those things they're not hallucinations.
No. So the case against ADHD drugs, basically they did a study of giving primates these stimulants and they transformed these primates from active, inquisitive animals into compulsive, dull creatures. Play, that most important method of learning, is typically reduced to zero. So we're putting our precious children on these stimulants and taking away their desire to play. That's crazy. And so they do it by disrupting the connections in the frontal lobes of the brain. They rev up overactive dopamine, norep, I'm going to say that wrong.
Norepinephrine.
Thank you, and serotonin. All right. So dexedrine and Adderall are pure amphetamines, right?
Yeah.
Even the Journal of the American Medical Association says Ritalin acts much like cocaine. The same effect as cocaine is just as addictive. And we're giving this to how many children?
Many thousands.
All right, so then I want to just show people how easy it is to get diagnosed with ADHD according to the fictional DSM-5. Just listen to this. If a child fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes in schoolwork, or has difficulty remaining focused during lectures, or does not seem to listen when spoken to directly, fails to finish schoolwork or chores, avoids dislikes, or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort like schoolwork or homework, fidget with or taps hands or feet or squirms in seat, leaves his place in the classroom, unable to be uncomfortable being still for extended time. I mean,
That describes most kids.
right, right. So it's so easy to get a prescription for these really toxic stimulants. So here are the direct effects. It overtaxes these children's heart because their heart rate and hypertension go up. It stunts their growth, causes stroke, involuntary movements, depression, apathy, as you said, psychosis, zombie-like behavior, obsessive compulsive, irritability, agitation, paranoid delusions. I mean, these are not good drugs.
No, they're all toxic to some effect.
Mm. Oh my goodness. All right. So the only reason psychiatry exists today is due to its illusions of disease and illusions of cure and treatment by extremely expensive, always damaging drugs. Now, once again, Jerry said there are some people who do, because of their violent behavior, need this, but shouldn't we be more cautious?
Yeah, they're just dousing everybody with these things.
Mm. So basically, the funny thing is, since the chemical imbalance has been so debunked by so many good researchers and doctors, they're now moving to a new theory, the brain circuitry defect. So I wanted to kind of wrap it up with this because when something doesn't work, like the genetic, the chemical imbalance, they're just cooking up another thing to
Yep.
sell these.
Another thing that they don't have any proof for, and it's always a physical thing. Notice that. It's not a spiritual thing. It's not an energetic thing. It's a physical thing. And they're not going to find any answers in a physical thing because it doesn't come from there.
Right. So what are they now offering for this brain circuitry defect?
Ketamine.
Mean? What? It's only approved as surgical anesthesia, but they're offering it for depression and anxiety. I can't. What? Okay, it distorts the perception of sight and sound and makes the user feel disconnected and not in control. So, a study by Stanford found a single dose of intravenous ketamine compared to placebo has no short-term effect on the severity of depression symptoms. But there are ketamine clinics popping up all over the country right now.
Yeah. They'll sell you anything you'll take.
Even and they call it Special K. Great. That sounds really easy, right? So
Yeah.
the thing that's interesting, it's also so now the FDA has approved esketamine, which is a nasal spray that is twice as potent as ketamine, even though it was found in a four week trial no more effective than placebo, right? In a safety study, 1 in 7 patients developed treatment emergent suicidal ideations and 6 attempted suicide. So, goodness, why is this thing still on the market?
Money.
Hmm. Oh my goodness. So that's the all the bad news. Okay, so is there anything else you want to add to the conversation we had before we switch to talking about what emotional distress really is and what a solution is?
Well, not really that I can think of. It's like I said, emotional distress can't be cured with a pill.
Right. Right. So emotional distress, unprocessed trauma, huge, right?
Right.
Negative emotional responses to that trauma.
See, and what they do with that unprocessed trauma is in regular psychotherapy, they just bring it up over and over and over and just throw it in the person's face until they get worn out by it. So they're re-traumatizing them every time,
Right.
you know.
Right. Talking about trauma just re-traumatizes you. Absolutely. So the other thing that causes emotional distress is psychological, physical, and sexual abuse, of course. And unfortunately, we live in a
Uh,
society that's so prevalent.
and pills don't cure that.
Mm-mm. Emotional distress is caused by demonic attacks and influences.
And pills don't cure that.
It's also caused by negative critical beliefs about yourself.
And pills don't cure that.
Also, poor lifestyle choices that reduce your physical well-being and vitality.
And pills don't cure that.
And a big one today is isolation and lack of social support and community.
Mhm. Pills don't cure that.
Right. They only treat symptoms, they do not get to the cause. So I like this.
Mm. The first step toward a humane scientific approach to care is to ensure that we get the message right. We need to change the framework of understanding from a disease model to a psychosocial model. That means recognizing that our mental health and well-being depends on things that happen to us, how we make sense of those events and how we respond to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So rather than
And
a disease model, let's look at the psychosocial.
right. And what we wouldn't be bringing all this up if we didn't have a solution to this problem. And this solution is not well known. It's not being advertised by the universities. It's not being advertised by uh, any big. The matter of fact, the people who came up with this, it was discovered in Australia, and it was discovered. It's a energetic psychotherapy that was discovered in Australia, not by a psychiatrist, not by a social worker, not by any clinician. It was discovered by a ship captain, John Mace. He drove big freighters back and forth across the ocean. He was a captain, and he was also a pilot, a harbor pilot for a while. So unlike psychiatry, who's trying to make people look like they are uh, robots, like physiological robots with no spirit. And, I spent 8 years in higher education, 4 years in graduate school, and not once did they mention anything about spirit. There was no spiritual anything there. It was spiritually drier than the friggin' Sahara Desert.
Mm.
I had to read other stuff to kind of just stay sane because there was nothing spiritual in it. There was nothing energetic in it. And we're spiritual, energetic beings. Your thoughts are energy, your mind is energy, your memories energy, your feelings are energy, your spirit's energy. You're all energy. If that energy leaves you, you're dead. If your spirit leaves you, you're dead. The mind does not do what people think it does. It all it does is take pictures of where you focus your attention. Your spirit does everything else. It does the reasoning, the sensing, the processing of all your senses, all that kind of. It does everything else. It's the spirit. It's not the mind. Okay,
Right.
so
And we come in as perfect spiritual beings who operate in peace, love, acceptance
yeah,
until unwanted experiences and trauma really put on these energetic, tumors that we've been talking about.
yeah. The planet Earth is a hard place to live. You're not going to come down here and not be traumatized.
Mm.
You're gonna get some trauma somewhere. Psychological problems occur from trauma, right? Trauma is also energetic. Here's an energetic happening that impinges on your psyche. And what happens, he found in a trauma, is that there's a very nasty negative feeling that stays there and just torments you. And along with that negative feeling that the trauma causes, there's a decision made as to what part you played in that trauma. Were you the cause of it, or what part, how are you related to that trauma? Unfortunately, you don't make good decisions during a trauma. They're
Right.
virtually always bad decisions. So whatever decision you made with regard to that trauma is 99% wrong. Okay? And what I'm seeing with my clients is that one of the major decisions made is something happened when they were 5 or 7 years old. Their mother said something or gave them a spanking or something like that, or just really dressed them down, and they got the impression that they were worthless because of that. So here I'm seeing a lady or a man that happened to, they're now 75, 60 years old, and they've been functioning with that idea that they were worthless since they were 7 years old. You know,
Right, but it's operating underneath their conscious awareness. So it's
right,
like it's something that once they agree to, they live as if it's true, but then it's not something that they really have conscious access to. It's this sense of not being worth something, or this sense of not being lovable.
right.
Right.
So even though they know they are not worthless, that doesn't change the feeling. They still feel it deep down because buried in their subconscious is this negative energy. So what happens is after that bad feeling stays there for long enough, it becomes non-functional. It's like, this is interfering with your function. And the ego shows up and goes, let me handle this. And it takes it and it throws it into the subconscious mind and then it locks it down in there. It's not dead, it's still alive. Yeah? And so it's still affecting your behavior.
Mhm.
And the way it affects it is that anytime somebody comes into your psychological sphere who is similar to the person who caused that trauma in the first place, this negative identity that's locked in your subconscious goes off like a landmine. So it's like the closer that person is to the person who traumatized you, the more explosive this thing is. And it tells you either attack that person or run from that person or avoid that person. So this is like the person you hate. No matter where you go, that person shows up. You could go from here to China and there would be a Chinese person, like the person you hate, show up that has these traits. Right? So that thing's sitting there like a landmine, and every time it goes off, it gets stronger. The stronger it gets, the more you believe that it's a part of your personality. But the
Mhm.
ego is projecting it out onto somebody else because it tells you it's that guy out there. You can feel it, you can see it. And a lot of times, as soon as somebody like that walks in the room, you know you don't like him. They don't even have to open their mouth. You just look at that guy and you go, oh, I don't like him. You can feel it. That's that negative identity up there. Okay. And it affects what you think, it affects what you feel, it affects what you say, it affects what you don't say, and it affects how the decisions you made in life. And it's in there working like a computer virus in the background. You're not aware of it. All you see is what happening outside, so it projects it outside. The other way that you see it happening is when you've been in trouble for something you did 2 or 3 times and you swear, I'm never going to do that again. 6 months later, you're right back there again. And you're like, how did I get here? You undertake some kind of training like driving a car. You consciously learn how to be a car driver. You consciously learn how to be a nurse or a doctor. These are conscious decisions that you have made to take on that identity. Like a pilot, he goes through all that training, he gets an identity as a pilot. And when you first start driving a car, you're like all nervous and you're afraid you're going to make a mistake or run into somebody and you're paying complete attention to what's going on. Now you get in the car after a few years and you're thinking about something else. That car is driving itself, and then when your attention is needed, your attention comes back and now you handle it. And sometimes you'll just drive to some location you've been to a million times before and you're running on autopilot, totally auto. You go, oh, that's not where I wanted to go. That's positive identity. It operates almost unconsciously. Negative identities like that also. It's like a brain virus, like a mind virus. Okay. It's operating in the background. You don't see it. Okay? But it's a batch or it's a pool of negative energy that's stuck there. Okay.
Mhm.
And it's clouding your existence. It's clouding your feelings and everything. It's bad news. It's causing a lot of problems.
Right. Not only that, I kind of view it as like an energy pit. It's draining your precious life energy. And that's why, if people have fed these over a lifetime and they have multiple, you can actually see they look like they're weighed down by their past.
Yeah.
And I don't know
So
about you, Jerry, but I will see people once they dissolve these,
yeah, their energy right
they
back. Yeah.
brighten up. They're just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah. It's instantaneous.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
sometimes they look 20 years younger.
Yeah. They smile for the first time in the whole session. But yeah, it takes a lot of energy to hold that thing in there. And if you drain it down to nothing, okay, it's a boat anchor. It will not take a charge again. And then you, you can turn it into an image. And then there's a process where that image will hook up to your spirit. That the spirit makes a choice as to what trauma to work with. Right. The second one is the spirit will drain that negative emotion once the apparatus is set up and it's hooked to the spirit. The spirit will take that negative energy and it will drain it down to nothing. Now, you won't see that, but you will feel it. And then it will be gone.
Mhm.
So you're working with a trauma and you bring the patient back, and after that thing is drained, you ask them, well, okay, go back to that trauma. How do you feel about it now? And they go, well, okay, I remember it, but there's no feeling to it. That negative
Right.
emotional energy is gone, it's drained, and like, Priest was saying, you can see them lighten up. You know, they're happier, and it happens within an hour, it's like magic. Uh,
Right. They could think of someone they hated or an event that was like really emotionally charged. And when you take them back, they're like, eh, I feel
yeah,
compassion for that person or
right,
neutral. Oh, that's just something that happened. And I
right.
think the thing that's so wonderful about the work that Jerry and I are doing is it's so empowering. Whereas the mental health model that we just walked you through is so disempowering because it's telling people you are a victim of your biology or your brain chemistry or your genetics, and you can't do anything.
Yeah, you're broken.
Yeah, you're broken.
You're
Well,
broken, you're gonna stay that way.
we can't really fix you, but we'll give something to alleviate the symptoms. And what we're
Yeah,
saying is you are designed to heal. Your spirit is designed to be able to hear your soul and your body. And because you unconsciously created these energetic kind of pits, you're the only one that can dissolve them. We're just guiding you to do the work. So it's very empowering to people.
yeah, and like Capri says, you're born as a pure spirit,
Mhm.
you know, you look at babies. I mean, they're just happy playing with toys and stuff. I mean, there's no worries for most of them. But as traumas build up, that gunk starts interfering with your spirit. So
Mhm.
once these negative identities are removed, then you become closer to who you really are. And all this can happen within an hour. It's virtually magic. The other thing that with this system is the therapist doesn't have to know what that trauma was. All they
Right.
need to know is where it happened. So if you were sexually abused, if you were have something really embarrassing happen to you, the therapist doesn't have to know what happened. It works anyway. It's almost like magic. And I've been in this field for 50 years. I have never ever seen anything work like this. I mean, regular,
Well, yeah, I can do a whole session and know nothing about somebody's.
yeah,
But I think the one thing, Jerry, you and I are doing is we're creating a very safe space for people to go through this.
yeah.
To create that safe space where they know that they are not judged, they don't have to share any details of their life, and they're just going to, you know, stop. They're going to feel feelings that they have spent so much energy trying to suppress, but unsuccessfully.
Yeah, and you should see them. After I don't know how many people that I'm worthless is one of the biggest ones that I deal with all the time. If something happened to them when they was a kid, they carry that through their entire lives.
Mm.
And you get rid of it when they're 60 or 70 years old and they're like feeling, oh, I feel good. This is great. I feel lighter. I feel more grounded. I'm more uh, calm. I'm more peaceful. And all this happens within an hour. This is energy we're dealing with. You're not dumping drugs on the brain. It's got nothing to do with drugs. You don't have to take any toxic drugs. It's energy. You're an energetic spiritual being. And these psychiatric therapies all have to do with physical stuff. We're working with energy. So this is like cutting edge stuff. There's only about 100 therapists that deal with this on the planet right now.
Mhm. Right. So part of what Jerry and I want to do is get the word out that you do not have to pour toxic drugs on your brain because
And
that's not the source of the problem. I mean, they don't even know where thoughts and emotions and consciousness come from.
no,
So,
no, they never ask where the thoughts come from.
mhm,
Psychiatry, psychology has never dealt with that at all. They
right.
just,
Jerry can tell you where these negative self-defeating thoughts are coming from, and it's not your
yeah,
brain.
yeah, it's not your brain. They're not coming from you, you
They're
know.
not yours. They're not yours. And so when we get rid of these energetic masses, the food source for these voices is gone.
Yeah, and it's disappeared. Or sometimes the voices themselves go. So I know there's a number of therapists who have, including myself, where the voices have disappeared.
Mm,
They've completely disappeared. And those are usually not the most severe cases. They're kind of like light to moderate cases where people are hearing voices, but that's a whole lot better than what psychiatry is doing with their pills.
right. Well, and what I tell my clients is, once we get rid of these, you need to fill it with a positive spiritual.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you what that should be for you, But you really do need to stay focused on the good, the true, the beautiful. Turn away from the darkness, as you say, don't listen to angry music, don't watch horror movies, just really stay focused on the good.
Yeah, on the spirit. See, and the other thing, once they have a negative self-concept, that becomes a self-repeating thing. So,
Mhm.
they go, oh, I'm worthless or I'm stupid. Or so they start looking for evidence to reinforce that. And of course, they find it. Once it's gone, they're not looking for that evidence anymore. That thing is gone. And I'd say, most people in either 1 to 3 sessions, they're done. They're
Right.
they're cleaned out. Psychiatry will keep you there for life, and it's so much cheaper. It's less expensive, much less expensive than psychiatry or their toxic pills, and
Yes.
it provides virtually permanent results. Those things don't come back. They're gone. The sense
Mhm.
of I'm worthless is gone. The sense of I'm stupid is gone. The senseless, I'm just a object. I mean, all these different things that the trauma caused, it's gone and it doesn't come back. And it's gone within an hour in most cases. Most people don't stay for any more than three. A lot of mine are, it's 1 session, that's it. They've had enough, two at the most usually.
Yeah, it really depends with my clients how deep they want to go. Some really want
Yeah.
to be like, I want to get rid of everything that's blocking, my spirit. So it
Mm.
really depends. But it is definitely an empowering, energetic psychotherapy that doesn't require drugs or talk or reliving trauma.
And it works.
And it
It
works.
actually works to get at the cause of the problem, unlike psychiatry and psychology.
Right.
I've had tons of in-service training. I went through all kinds of counseling techniques. You know, they really don't work well. They don't work well at all. This
Mm.
compared to what they're teaching in the university. They should be teaching this in the universities. Mm.
Well, it was interesting. I was looking at some statistics from I think it was 2022 when they were like, what was the NIH like funding for research? And it was mainly genetics and brain science, and maybe 4 to 7% was going to alternative treatments like psychotherapy. So,
No, they don't want this because this is going to interfere with them. I would say, from my, you know, almost 50 years of experience, that this system could probably take away 65 to 70% of what psychiatry is doing with better results.
mhm. Right. And I mean, when I think about everything that I tried and all the self-help books that I bought,
Yeah, yeah, totally
gonna
worthless.
probably get rid of the need for all that self-help and personal development that people get on this hamster wheel of constantly trying to improve, improve, improve. And I think it is in just this they're trying to prove that they're lovable or worthy. And it's mm,
Yeah, I've had doctors that I'm working with where something happened to them, and like you were saying, they're trying to prove that they're worthy, and they become a doctor, and they're still trying to prove they're worthy because of something that happened to them decades ago.
right.
So like Caprice was saying, that it kind of takes all the garbage off your soul. So with each session, you get closer to who you really are without all this garbage messing you up. It just gets rid of it.
Hmm.
Mm.
That's a good way. Yeah, exactly. We're just helping you clean up all the emotional garbage you accidentally picked up on your life journey
Mm.
so that you
And
can really be yourself and enjoy your life and create. You're here to create something beautiful.
yeah, and you can read more about this on our website. So mine's jerrymarzinsky.com. And I've got some videos there on it. And Caprice and I are making this video also to let you know that this does exist. You
Right.
don't have to be taking these toxic drugs to deal with depression or anxiety or all this other stuff. I mean, um,
Yeah.
there's other things that can be done that are much more effective that they don't want you to know about.
Right. And I put together like a whole document that's got a lot more resources if you're interested in doing I would encourage you to do your own research. Not to believe a thing Jerry and I said. We tried to source everything that we talked about today. But yeah, you can find Jerry at jerrymarzinsky.com and me at capricethorson.com. And is there anything else you want to add, Jerry?
No, it'll change your life. You know, like I said, I've been on the front lines of mental health for close to 50 years. I have never, ever seen anything work as well as this. You know, and they don't want it out. You know, it's not being advertised anywhere. You don't see it anywhere.
Mhm. Right. It's unfortunately our secret, but we're trying to get it out into the world. So,
Anything else you want to say?
um, I guess when I went through some really severe relationship trauma, I was told that I was, a broken vessel, but that's okay. It lets the light in. And I wasn't satisfied with that answer. I was like, I don't want to be a broken vessel the rest of my life. And so I just want to end on the note that your spirit is perfect, it's strong, and it's designed to heal. So there is nothing you can't heal.
You know, and this system just gets rid of that junk that is impeding it. You know,
Mhm.
like when you're done, you will be closer to who you really are and not who you think you are. And you'll feel a lot better almost instantly in
Mhm.
most cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, you can write us if you have any questions. At my email is JAMARZ1, the number one at outlook.com. Mm, You want to give them your email, Caprice?
Sure. Just Caprice at capricethorson.com.
Mm.
Pretty
And
simple.
and on our websites, there's more information about this system and how to access it.
Yep.
Okay, so it's been good talking to you guys. What we're telling you is true. They don't want this out there. Mhm. So the drug companies, psychiatry doesn't want this out there. Psychology doesn't want this out there. You know, this they don't want something that works. They want to keep treating you over and over and over. Mhm. With
Right.
this system, 2 or 3 sessions, and for the most part, you're done.
Well, and that's why we're so passionate about offering this to people. And I guess, Jerry even came out of retirement to do this.
Yeah, I should be retired
Yeah.
supposedly.
I keep going, how are you enjoying your retirement, Jerry?
Yeah, I'm pretty busy. That's not. I don't know. Yeah, when somebody cancels an appointment, instead of being disappointed, I'm like, yeah, yeah, I got some time.
Right. All right, good. Yes, reach out if you have any questions. We'd love to have a conversation.